Okay, imagine this for a second. Something massive happens, a truly catastrophic event.
Like an explosion.
A huge explosion, powerful enough to rival, say, 100 tons of TNT. It shatters windows, destroys buildings, and sends this toxic cloud drifting over villages for miles.
Right, a major disaster.
Exactly. But here's the twist. The next morning, you open the newspaper, you turn on the radio, and there's nothing. Not a word. According to the official record, it just never happens.
It's a chilling thought, isn't it? The idea that reality itself can just be edited, that something that big can be deleted from history as it happens.
And that's what we're getting into today. Welcome to the deep dive. This story feels like it's straight out of a Cold War thriller, but it is very, very real. We're talking about the Kyshtym disaster of 1957.
But this is one of those cases that really forces you to think about how information gets controlled. It's not just a story about a technical failure. It's about this collision between high-stakes geopolitics and, basic human safety.
We've got a set of sources here, mostly from a collection titled "This Event Has No Official Explanation," which covers the incident in the Soviet Union's southern Ural Mountains. And that title, it really says it all.
It absolutely does. And the key thing we're going to find is that the no explanation part wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. It was a feature, not a bug.
Because the event itself at the time officially didn't exist.
And the place where it happened didn't officially exist either.
So let's set the scene. It's September 1957. We're deep in the Soviet Union, and a storage tank explodes. But this isn't just any old tank.
No, not even close. This tank was part of a massive complex called the Mayak Production Association. And to understand the explosion, you first have to understand Mayak.
And from our sources, Mayak wasn't a place you could just, look up on a map.
You couldn't. It wasn't on any public maps. The city nearby, where all the scientists and workers lived, it didn't even have a name.
No name.
Just a postal code. Chelyabinsk 40.
That's just wild to think about. Living in a city that's basically just a number. It speaks volumes about the level of secrecy here.
It does. It was what they called a closed city. The entire complex was purpose-built right after World War II for one single top-secret reason.
Which was?
To produce plutonium for the Soviet atomic bomb program.
Okay, so there's the context. Late 40s, early 50s. The Cold War is kicking into high gear. The U.S. has the bomb, and the Soviets are desperately trying to catch up.
Desperately is the perfect word. The source material really paints a picture of this mindset. It was all about speed. Speed over safety, speed over everything.
So they were cutting corners.
They were cutting corners to save time, not just money. It was a race. The government demanded results, and they demanded them fast.
Which means the engineers are under unbelievable pressure.
Immense pressure. And when you're rushing complex nuclear science, you make dangerous choices. The documents talk about things like inadequate cooling systems, poor containment, and this is the key to our story, almost no real plan for dealing with the nuclear waste.
And that brings us right to the ticking clock of the disaster. These tanks. The source describes them as huge underground containers.
Right. And they were holding this incredibly radioactive liquid waste, a kind of slurry leftover from processing plutonium.
And this stuff is so radioactive, it's hot.
It generates its own heat, constantly. It's always decaying, always releasing energy. So the tanks needed an active cooling system running 24/7 just to stop them from boiling over.
Which is fine, as long as the cooling system is actually, working.
And as long as someone is watching it. The whole design was based on the assumption that nothing would ever go wrong.
Yeah.
But in 1957, that assumption completely fell apart.
The source says one of the cooling systems failed. But this is the detail that I can't get over. The failure went unnoticed. For how long?
For months.
Months? How is that even possible?
That's the part that just stops you cold.
Yeah.
It wasn't a sudden break. It was this slow, creeping failure. The cooling stopped, so the waste inside the tank just started to heat up day by day. It was like an underground pressure cooker.
And nobody checked the gauges. Nobody noticed.
Maybe the gauges were broken. Maybe the culture was so focused on production targets that nobody dared report a problem. Whatever the reason, the oversight was total. And then, on September 29th, 1957, physics just took over.
The tank exploded.
It did. The force of somewhere between 70 and 100 tons of TNT. But it's really important to clarify something the source points out.
What's that?
This wasn't a nuclear detonation, not like an atomic bomb.
Right. It wasn't a chain reaction, a fission event.
Exactly. It was a chemical explosion. The dried out nitrate salts and the intense pressure just blew. But the result was a 160-ton concrete lid being thrown into the air, and a massive plume of radioactive dust shot a kilometer up into the atmosphere.
And the scale of the fallout it's just staggering. The source says over 20,000 square kilometers were contaminated.
It's an enormous area. We're talking about the size of a small country. Rivers, lakes, farms, villages, all of it just blanketed in this invisible poison. And this is where the story pivots. It goes from a technical disaster to a truly human one.
Right. This is the official silence part of the story. You've got this colossal explosion. You've got contamination everywhere. People must have seen something.
Oh, they did. People reported seeing the sky glow, this strange, eerie red and violet color. Some of the local newspapers actually tried to pass it off as the Northern Lights.
The Northern Lights in the Southern Urals.
It's the ultimate cover story, isn't it? Frame a nuclear catastrophe as a beautiful act of nature.
That's chilling.
For the people living there, the reality was grim. There was no public warning, no announcements, nothing.
The sources say some villages were eventually evacuated, but not right away. It took days, weeks.
Days, weeks, yes. And even when the soldiers showed up, the lack of information was total. Just imagine that. Someone in uniform comes to your door and says, you have to leave now.
And you can't ask why.
You can't ask why. You have to leave your house, your animals. They tell you to burn your belongings.
And some of them were told it was only temporary.
Yes, that was the cruelest part. You'll be back soon. But they never came back. The state bulldozed their homes to make sure of it.
So what about the health effects? I mean, with that much radioactive strontium and cesium falling from the sky, people had to be getting sick.
They were. Classic signs of acute radiation sickness, hair loss, skin lesions, collapsing immune systems. But the state was prepared for that too.
Yeah.
This is where you get into what you could call medical gaslighting.
Medical gaslighting.
The medical records were all sealed. When people died, the death certificates didn't say radiation poisoning. They used these vague terms like unknown illness.
Unknown illness. So even in death, the truth was just completely erased.
For decades, the Soviet authorities flat out denied any accident ever happened. Because to admit the accident would be to admit a failure in their nuclear program. And during the Cold War, that kind of admission was unthinkable.
But the infuriating part, reading through these documents, is that the government wasn't in the dark. They knew exactly what had happened.
Oh, they knew. Instantly. The internal memos, the declassified reports, they showed that scientists were measuring the radiation levels almost immediately. They knew how bad the contamination was.
And the levels were high enough to demand an urgent evacuation.
Absolutely. By their own standards, those areas should have been cleared out on day one. But they weren't. Many of the villages just stayed.
And our source says that daily life just continued. Kids went to school, farmers worked the fields.
It's just heartbreaking to picture it. Families living their lives completely unaware they're in a death zone, and the authorities knew. In some cases, they even used these populations as a giant unwilling science experiment. They monitored them to see what long-term exposure to this stuff would do to a human body.
So they were basically lab rats.
Without their knowledge or consent, yes. It gave the state valuable data, but the human cost is...
Yeah.
It's just off the charts.
Let's talk about the numbers. How many people are we talking about here?
The best estimate is that around 250,000 people were exposed to significant levels of radiation. 250,000 people.
And the land itself. The source says some villages were just erased.
Literally wiped off the map. They disappeared from official records, from administrative documents, to another layer of the cover-up. If the village doesn't exist on paper, then the disaster that destroyed it doesn't exist either.
It's just a complete denial of reality, not just your illness, but the very ground you lived on.
Which led to this total lack of closure for people. No compensation for decades. Many victims went to their graves never knowing what they were exposed to. Even their doctors were kept in the dark.
So how does a secret this big ever get out? Because obviously we know about it now.
It took a long time, about 20 years. The story really broke in the late 1970s, and it's largely thanks to one man, a Soviet biologist named Zhores Medvedev.
Medvedev, he's a key figure in our source material.
He was a dissident scientist who had been exiled to London, and he started noticing a strange pattern in publicly available Soviet scientific journals.
Okay.
He saw all these studies about the effects of radiation on plants, on fish, on animals in a specific region. None of the papers said where the studies took place, but they all described the same unique ecosystem. He put two and two together.
He realized they weren't studying a lab experiment.
Exactly. He realized they were studying the aftermath of a real-world nuclear disaster. He published his findings in 1976.
And how did the world react?
With a lot of skepticism at first. Western scientists just couldn't believe a disaster of that magnitude could be kept secret for 20 years. But here's the crazy part.
Yeah.
The CIA knew about it.
Wait, the CIA knew?
They had spy plane photos from the late 50s showing a huge, burnt, devastated landscape. They knew something had happened, but they kept quiet too.
Why on earth would they do that? You'd think they'd jump at the chance to embarrass the Soviets.
You would. But at the time, the US was trying to build its own nuclear power industry. The fear was that if a story broke about a catastrophic nuclear waste explosion in the USSR, it would scare the American public and kill the industry at home.
Wow. So the silence wasn't just on the Soviet side. It was this bizarre, unspoken agreement driven by Cold War paranoia and domestic politics.
Precisely. It took until 1989, during Gorbachev's era of glasnost, for the Soviet government to finally officially admit that the accident happened. 32 years of denial.
So why isn't Kyshtym as famous as Chernobyl? When you say nuclear disaster, everyone thinks Chernobyl.
That's a really good question. I think it comes down to visibility. Chernobyl was impossible to hide. The radiation cloud drifted over all of Europe. There were dramatic images, the burning reactor. It was a single cinematic event.
Kyshtym was quieter.
Much quieter. There was no film, no dramatic photos on the news. It was a slow-motion disaster that played out in remote forests and villages. The effects, the cancers and illnesses, they took years to appear. It was a disaster of bureaucracy and biology, not a televised explosion.
And the secrecy worked for a while.
The secrecy was the real containment vessel. It didn't contain the radiation, but it contained the truth.
So where does all this leave us now? The sources we have seem to suggest the story still isn't fully told.
Not at all. There's still no complete public record. We don't know who specifically made the call to delay the evacuations. We don't have an accurate death toll because the records were systematically falsified for decades.
It's still a history with huge blank spaces.
Exactly. And the source makes this really powerful point at the end. It says the Kyshtym explosion wasn't really an accident. Not in the way we think of one.
What does that mean?
It means it wasn't just a cooling pipe breaking. It was the result of a series of human choices. Choices made under pressure. Choices protected by an ideology of total secrecy. The human tragedy wasn't the explosion. It was the decision to hide it.
It's the tragedy of the sealed files.
That's the perfect way to put it.
And that really leads to the final thought from our source material, and I want to read it directly because it hits hard. How many other events, documented but unseen, still exist only as sealed files waiting to be opened?
And that's the question that stays with you. We know about Kyshtym because a few brave people spoke out and the wall of secrecy eventually crumbled. But what else is out there? What other stories are just sitting in an archive box somewhere, stamped top secret?
It really makes you rethink the history we take for granted. It's a reminder to keep asking questions and to never assume the official story is the whole story.
Absolutely. That curiosity is the only real defense against that kind of silence.
Well, that's a powerful and frankly unnecessary place to leave it. This has been our deep dive into the Kyshtym disaster. Thanks for listening and stay curious.